There you go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tommy Wasmond, and I run Proficient Engineering here in Knoxville. Before we get to our featured speaker, I'm going to give you a quick update on Proficient and the work that we do here. Proficient specializes in mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineering, and it was founded in Atlanta in 2008. Our 6 principals brought me on in July of 2019 to start our first satellite office, which is here in Knoxville. Since then, we have grown to 7 employees and completed over 140 projects with 20 East Tennessee partners. And these have been across a wide range of commercial and industrial types. In Knoxville, we've been doing mostly restaurants, retail, multifamily, but we have the capacity to do any sort of industrial or commercial project you might have on your plate. We've been growing very quickly, faster than I ever thought. But since those first 6 months, we've actually tripled the amount of work we've brought in each year. And this year we purchased our own office off Sutherland Avenue, and I'm looking forward to filling it with more bright young engineers as we continue to grow and help Knoxville grow. But we didn't do it alone. Besides the help we received from our home office in Atlanta, we've received tremendous support from several design firms here. And I'd like to give specific thanks to the Architecture Collaborative, Design Innovations, DK Levy, OISK3, Mark Randolph, and Studio 4. I wish I could thank everybody, but those ones have given us the most support. And we're looking forward to working with them for many years to come. It's an exciting time to be building a business in Knoxville. I grew up and spent most of my life here, so it's clear to see how we're poised to undergo a new phase of development. Between an influx of new neighbors, demanding construction workload, and multiple urban revival projects, Knoxville's future looks bright. And now our task is just to make sure that that growth is made with the needs of our entire community and world in mind. And with that, I'll give it to Michael.
And with that, I will introduce our final design feed for 2021. Z. Smith, FAIA Lead Fellow, PhD, is a Principal and Director of Sustainability and Building Performance at Eskew Dumez Ripple, winner of the AIA Firm Award. His built work includes academic, commercial, and residential buildings, including winning the AIA Committee on the Environment Top 10 Award. He has taught at the Thaden School of Architecture and served as the North American representative to the International Union of Architects Commission on the Sustainable Development Goals. Please welcome Z. Smith.
Wow, this is a very fancy podium, but it is bolted. So, oh, I know, I can start a timer here. Always a good idea with me. So thank you again, and thank you. The host committee has been very generous. I got a chance to spend some time with some UT students this morning. Really bright, great questions. I also got to practice my talk for today, which is good. I will offer my condolences to those of you sitting in the back for the screen. I think you can see it online if you want to be able to see things more closely. So you'll just have to take my word for it as to what some of the slides say, but that'll be fine. But they took great care of me, the host committee last night. We ate far too much pizza at Adobo, which is, I think, a ritual here coming to Knoxville. But at any rate, it's a beautiful time to be here. There are learning objectives. Eskew Dumez Ripple is a firm of about 50. We were founded about 30 years ago in New Orleans by Alan Eskew, Steve Dumez, and Mark Ripple. Post-Katrina, the firm started to grow and went from a firm that mostly had kind of LSU and Tulane grads to drawing people from now 40 different university programs, including UT, which seems to send us one amazing candidate every 3 years or so. And so please keep that coming. And also the firm has become a lot more diverse. Last year, we reached the high water mark of having 20% of the African-American architects in the state of Louisiana. Lamentably, that meant we had 2. So it's something we're all working on, and we're committed, like I think it sounds like your AIA is, and working harder on the pipeline to improve the welcomeness of our profession to different groups and start to better match the nation. Where we're from. We are from, I like to say I wasted the first 49 years of my life, and then I moved to Louisiana 12 years ago when my wife joined the Tulane faculty. And for those of you who've been to New Orleans, I think you know it's easy to say it's a unique city. It is unlike any other. It's kind of on the front lines of all the challenges we face. It is on the front line, obviously, of climate change. It's got a front row seat. Experiencing kind of in advance of what a lot of the other cities of the country are. When I moved there, it was after Katrina, I was part of the helping to rebuild effort. But at the time, my friends in New York City were very smug about how unsustainable the city New Orleans was. And then Hurricane Sandy hit and they shut up, which was great. Because in some sense, we all live in New Orleans. It's just when it's coming. As somebody once said, William Gibson said, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And so we all get different parts of this future. Obviously, to be in Louisiana, to be in what was once a slave state, to be in a state with great racial and economic inequality, also means we're in the front line of that too. And so you see all kinds of really inspiring efforts going on in New Orleans of getting different groups to work together to make the city better. And part of it is we have this amazingly rich culture that we all get to enjoy. I worked for a while in Vancouver, and then I worked in New Orleans. And when I went back to Vancouver to give a talk, I looked up, Wikipedia maintains, there are Wikipedia pages on the number of songs written about your city that mention your city. And I believe New Orleans tops that list. It has over 300 songs on that list that mention or are written about New Orleans. Vancouver at that point had 2. So it's an inspiring city. And to walk through the streets of the French Quarter means you will catch a glimpse of this amazing thing of these French Quarter courtyards, which have made for the 250 years after the city was founded, but before the invention of air conditioning, made that climate tolerable, which was to provide shade through a porch, to provide gathering outdoor spaces through a courtyard, and often they would collect water off the rooftops. And in fact, through 1910, the majority of buildings in the French Quarter collected their own water through their rooftops, through these cisterns that you can sort of see here in this chart. And then they would dribble that out through a fountain or something like that, because just to hear water makes you feel cooler. So again, a porch, a courtyard, and a water feature become the kind of characteristic elements of what it means to live in the South. And so we've tried to kind of borrow those ideas. After the fact, when we started to look through our built work, we said, you know, it turns out that actually that's the unifying theme in a lot of our work. So this is the Bioinnovation Center. It's a Coat Top 10 award winner. Uses 1/3 as much energy per square foot per year as a typical lab building. It's a incubator for biotech firms. And it has organized, this is the entry, and this is a stacking of porches. So it is, so far as I know, the only biotechnology laboratory in the world where you can step away from your DNA sequencer, step out onto one of these porches, catch Mardi Gras beads, and get back to work. So it also has a courtyard, which is, it was built on the site of a dry cleaning establishment, which meant all the soils were contaminated. And so the soils had to be remediated. And instead of covering the whole site with an impermeable surface, we stacked up the available floor area ratio to make a 4-story lab, had some room for parking and room for a courtyard. And so this is the typical French Quarter street plan, where all of the backyards of those buildings form a merged courtyard. And if you've had a meal outdoors, you've been in one of those kind of places like Café Amélie and so on. And then to control the harsh sun in the summer heat, we use those adjustable louvers in the shutters. But because we get so many hurricanes, the blades will get knocked out and we'll replace one. And it's not quite the right size, but it's okay, it'll fit. And so you get this variety in those. And so the facade of this building to control the sun has this kind of louver, but instead of coming off as like something with all the charm of an automobile radiator, it has this variation in spacing and texture and depth and so on that adds to the richness. And then a water feature, which is we took all the water that came down from the roof of the building, fed it into these water features that float along. We recirculate it with a little pump, and then that aerates and cleans the water. And then when the next rainfall comes, that overflows into a thing that injects it into the parking area, which is up on crushed stone to get the elevation right, that acts as a 80,000 gallon rainwater detention facility that then drops the water back in slowly to our soils. Because why New Orleans is sinking is because we so energetically pump the water out of our streets and out of our sites to make it drain, but like a sponge on your kitchen counter that's left to dry out, it gets thinner. So if we can keep the soil moist, we can keep the buildings up. And so that's an example of this was seen as wacky. It was the first pervious concrete installation in the state of Louisiana when it was built. But when the city of New Orleans announced their new comprehensive zoning ordinance requiring pervious concrete and pervious pavings, they held the kickoff event at the Bioinnovation Center to say, look, it's here, and it was actually cheaper to do than a conventional system. So we are in New Orleans and we are of New Orleans, but we work now everywhere. About half of our work is around the country. We have 2 international projects. We have a performance hall in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and we're right now working on a affordable housing mass timber project in Vancouver, British Columbia. But in general, we're working across the country in all kinds of different building types. But we try to take that way of looking around and connecting people to culture and climate. And that's our theme, is how do we bring that into other places where we're working? So this project just won the National AIA Education Award. It's the Thaden School, funded by the Walton Family Foundation, and it's an independent school which tries to tie people back to the land in their direct experience and make their education grades 6 through 12 kind of stick better. So this is named in honor of Louise Thaden, the aviatrix who won the national cross-country airplane race in 1933, but was born and raised in Bentonville. It uses this pedagogy of the study of how you grow things and then the transformations, the biological transformations when you cook things in its meals program. So it's a high school with a culinary program. It teaches kids physics and engineering, and then you have to build the bicycle you use to get to school on. So that's called the Wheels program. And then you learn the art of writing and storytelling and making of videos, and that's the Reels program. So meals, wheels, and reels. They've also decided to start to have a performing arts component, which I call the Squeals program, but they have not adopted that yet. But obviously to build in Northwest Arkansas, there you have this amazing forest building tradition from Fay Jones of building grand structures out of cheap dimensional lumber, like Thorn Crown, right? So we, steal with pride. What we did was we looked at that way of building and we said, we're from New Orleans, so learning and community happen around food. So instead of building a big auditorium, what you should build is an amazing dining hall that begins and at the middle of your day and ends your day. You bring people together there. And so that then turned into the gathering spot for this school. And it's built out of cheap dimensional lumber. So we're building this school with an energy use intensity of like 1/3 the typical school with ground source heat pumps and all kinds of fancy stuff. We're building for $200 a square foot. And to produce a space of this kind of cathedral-like quality. So, but again, we can't help ourselves. It's got a porch, a courtyard, and a water feature. And that water feature, though, is part of the pedagogy. It's where they teach students about hydrology, about how plants actually clean the rainfall, clean pollutants out of what's gathered on the rooftop and so on. So we build all these different building types. Live work, residential projects, office projects, co-working spaces, learning environments, that's K-12, university buildings, research laboratories, and cultural and civic, which means things like parks and so on. About 9 years ago, another member of staff came up with a wacky idea saying, you know, we have two pretty good universities in our region, but we are competing now against firms from like Boston and so on that's got a slew of great universities around them. We need to be doing research, but we can't count on the universities to do it. So how could we promote research within our own practice? So each year it's like listening to This American Life. We pick a theme and then we have stories on that theme. And in this case, we pick a theme from the world of architecture and the built environment and say, we would like to learn more about this. There's 20 great books. You read all of them and tell us which 3 we should read. There's hundreds of articles on that theme. You read them all. Tell us which ones we should do. Present them to us every 6 weeks. You'll have a talk, a lunch and learn internally. So themes from building performance to resilience to health in the built environment, tools for community engagement, building envelope design, and so on up. And this has really pushed us forward. So they said, what are you doing? You're taking your revenue and you're just dumping into research. We tell these people that they cannot work on billable work. They cannot bill any hours. They can plug into an ongoing project and make it ask other questions, push it forward, or they can advance the conversation within the firm. What we found is this pays astonishing dividends in us being able to compete with the Perkins and Wills that have 1,500 staff and so on. So if you're a mid-sized firm, working this way, working collaborative with universities and so on, for us has been incredibly productive and a really great investment. So one of the things we started with our first research fellowship under building performance was we joined the 2030 commitment. And the 2030 commitment is this thing that the AIA started that says, remember, the 2030 challenge from Ed Mesria was, in 2005, he said, let's look around. We can all see buildings out there that are using about half as much energy as the typical building. A typical school, half as much energy. A typical lab building, half as much energy. So let's just say we're going to try to make all our projects hit that energy savings, 50% savings. And then what we want to go is to 60% savings and 70% savings and 80% savings, by which point, by 2030, renewable power should be, up its learning curve and we should be doing much better and we can get to net zero by 2030. So that's the 2030 challenge and commitment. The AIA turned that into their 2030 commitment program. And in it, you basically use a really easy web interface and you log every project that you're doing. Or in our case, we're often like, if it was some little tiny thing, we don't bother. But for, we find sort of 90% of our revenue, we just add up our fees and log them in, whether it's new construction, renovation, or interiors only projects. And then you log through, like, what are the energy uses? What's the lighting, power density, all those things. That gets aggregated up and you can see how all of the signatories, who now represent 30% of all the construction in America, are 2030 signatories. And you can then see how you're doing against all these other firms. We choose to publish how we're doing. And for the first 3 years, we were behind. And then people said, why do you keep making this public? We're not as good as the average firm in their savings. And we said, well, we'll get the fear of God into people and they'll get some focus. And so we kept working on our internal practices and now are doing significantly better. Now we're not doing as well as Ed Mesria wants us, but we're doing better than we used to. And that's given us encouragement and a right to play and compete against bigger firms. So the really important thing, and I'll make the pitch in the end of this talk, is I want you all to try to sign up for the 2030 commitment. Firms with 3 employees do it. Firms with 1,500 employees do it. You get, tell them what they've won, Johnny. You get a cavalcade of tools that will help you do better. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but it's been transformative. So this is about how while you're in design, how you'll think the projects do. But if we're going to be credible when we're pitching to a client some energy saving technology, we need to prove that it really worked. Because we've all heard about buildings that had really great, on paper it was going to be great, but in reality it didn't. And so we started back in 2012 getting the utility bills for our most prominent projects and adding them up, logging them into Portfolio Manager and so on, and then seeing how they're really doing. So this little kind of Hall of Fame, Hall of Shame is some of our most famous projects where you're seeing in yellow the energy use per square foot per year of the typical building of that building type. And in black, the number is how much did that building really use that year. So this is a lab building that's at Innovation Center. The average lab building, 370. The measured energy use of that building, 116. and so on down the line. A few buildings above the median, right? That's okay. But I like this idea. Somebody once said the most successful diet in the world is called the pencil diet. In the pencil diet, you can eat whatever you want so long as you write it down. Because when you write it down, then you have to say, you know, I did have 2 of those cookies, not 1, right? And so the 2030 commitment is basically the pencil diet for buildings. It's by just recording what you're doing and looking at it in the cold light of day, that will give you the incentive to, you know, straighten up and fly right. So we feel good about that, but we all know, especially when I was giving the lecture this morning, the world's on fire. And we're facing a lot of problems everywhere. You know, climate, culture, the divisions in our own nation, divisions in nations all around that are putting everybody at each other's throats. We've invented an amazing set of technologies that make people mad, right? Facebook, it's all built, the algorithm is all built on that if you're angry, if you use an angry emoji, it'll get promoted up the chain much heavier than if you use a smiley face, because they know that that's a way to get people to spend more time staring at Facebook. So we've invented these perfect technologies for dividing us apart at the same time that our climate's in real trouble and we're headed towards a lot worse phase. So what are we gonna do? Well, before we go there, I wanna make you feel, and I have to give this pitch to students especially, because students are at an age now where they've seen so much bad news about where we are that they kind of get despondent and they disconnect. So I think it's really important that we step back for a minute and say, actually, you should know we're making great progress on a whole bunch of fronts. And it's not like, I can go back to sleep, but we should take credit for what we're doing and what we're doing right. The first one is we are eliminating poverty. If you look at, this is some statistics for, this is the number of population, and in red is the number of people in extreme poverty. It's on track to go to 0 by 2030. So the efforts going on around the world to lift people out through good policies, through good education, through the advancement of technology, through the advancement of markets and aid and trade, it's happening. And that's an amazing thing, to think that we could really make poverty history. We could eliminate poverty in our lifetimes. When I was growing up, I was told that the world consisted of the people who were poor, who lived short lives, and the people who were rich, who lived long lives. And there was this huge gulf between them. In fact, most of the world now is middle class. Most of the world is living up at, like in China, life expectancies in the mid to high 70s and so on. And this drift from poor and short lives to wealthy and long lives, you can watch these bubbles where the bubble size is the population of the country. They're all just moving up to our corner of it. And this is an amazing transformation of human life, and we should feel excited about that. One of the things that's happening is education, especially education for women. When you educate women, when gender equity happens in education, what happens is people feel, and when kids will survive to adulthood, the number of babies per woman just drops. Because I know my child will live. I don't have to produce 8 children so that 2 will live. And so I won't have 8 children. So what happens is we think there's a population explosion. In fact, what's happening is population is already falling in certain parts of the world. It's going to peak at a more population than we have today. There's lots of building projects in China and India yet to happen, in Africa. But population will peak, stabilize, and then start actually shrinking. Education is growing amazingly. Again, education, improving the equity and access for education is the thing that is driving the creation of wealth, and it's driving the balance of family sizes and so on. But we still have that climate problem. How did we get so rich? Well, it's like we inherited not gold, but we inherited coal. We inherited hundreds of millions of years of forests piling up and then turning into coal and oil and gas. And then we decided we could set fire to them and dump that in the atmosphere. And that was a great way to get rich. And as long as the atmosphere was infinite, we were fine. But the atmosphere, it turns out, is not infinite. And so we know, the scientists know, everyone, there's no more any doubt that what we're doing from drawing from that savings account that we've inherited is we're raising the climate's temperature, the planet's temperature, we're acidifying the oceans and so on. Now, luckily, we are smart. We are doing all kinds of amazing things because we're humans. And so we can innovate our way out of this. As the Minister for Oil for Kuwait said, Saudi Arabia, he observed, The Stone Age did not end because they ran out of stone, right? The oil age will not end because we run out of oil. The oil age will run because we come up with something better and cheaper. Obviously, we have the same issues here in Louisiana. This is the Gulf in 1985, and this is the coastline more recently, where through the subsidence of the soils, but also through rising sea levels, we're losing a football field every 90 minutes. The things that we've done are devastating wild populations. We're on track to lose half of all species. Bird populations, what my wife studies is bird population, bird migration, and it's all connected. And bird populations are collapsing. Insect populations are collapsing faster, and it's the insects that pollinate half the food that we ate today. And so if we don't get a handle on that, how do we get there? Now, everyone's good at making a promise, and at COP26, people start passing this around on social media. Man announces he will quit drinking by 2050. So it's easy to make a commitment very far in the future that you will live a more virtuous life. But what we need to do is change things now. So how will we get there? This was a little quote on Twitter. I'll just read because you can't possibly read it. The young activist says, the youth, we want the planet to stay habitable. Politicians, but have you considered a more moderate position? You know, some kind of compromise. So obviously to the youth, they say, wait, how can there be a compromise from having a habitable planet, one that can support life? So what can we do and how quickly can we do it? So there are all these improvement. The nice thing is through the whole Paris process, the amount of temperature rise, we've already experienced 1.1 degrees C averaged out over the planet. We're on track. We were on track for 4 degrees. Then the Paris process got us to 2.5, now to 1.8. And that's because we are learning how to do things faster and better. One good precedent, this is the total carbon emissions of the United Kingdom from 1860 to today. The United Kingdom now emits less carbon dioxide today than it did in 1890, even though it has twice the population and 4 times the per capita income. So we know it's possible, and this replication of industrialization and decarbonization is happening everywhere. In Colorado, the local utility held an auction for the cheapest source of power that could be bought in 4-hour increments. And one of the competitors was running the existing coal-fired power plant that they already owned and had already amortized, but just had to pay for the coal. And the other one was building new solar panels and batteries, and the solar panels were cheaper. So that's what they signed up for. This is the Kentucky Coal Museum, whose utility bills were driving their affordability, and so they installed solar panels on the roof. So when you visit the Kentucky Coal Museum, you're having a solar-powered experience. Now, this is just, you might think that, what's going on? Is this some weird subsidy or something? And the answer is no. This is like the laws of economics, the laws of physics. You can't possibly see this, but this is powers of 10 in the price per watt from a solar panel. And this is powers of 10 of the number that have ever been made. If you take mice and you put them in a maze and time how long it takes them to run the maze, you run them the first time they've ever seen that and you get 1 time. And then you let them take a 2nd time and a 3rd time. The mice will learn. And what happens is with the logarithm of the number of tries, the time or the cost goes down linearly. And so this is called by economists the experience curve or the log law of learning. Well, this shows up in solar panels where now solar panels have dropped 99.6% in price since 1976 when I was in high school. But this is the price of Model Ts. The Model T was produced over a 20-year period and they produced millions and millions, and they just kept track of how much it cost. And they found that again, that same log law of learning was experienced. So this is just nothing weird or magical. This is what allows you to have more computing power than went to the moon in your pocket. It's that same kind of learning. So this is what humans do, and we can be pretty proud of it. Now, this is how we produce power today. Still, red is coal, orange is natural gas, purple is nuclear, all are renewables over here in the top left corner. But this is all the power we added last year. 39% solar, 31% wind, 11% hydro, 17% natural gas, a little bit of nuclear. So the point is, no one is building not only coal, very few people are building natural gas. The future is renewable. The grid will decarbonize, not just because it's a socially right thing to do, because it's actually cheaper, because we're all running down these experience curves. So if you make an all electric building today, even though that electricity may today come from a coal plant that's being, slowly becoming too expensive to run, it will be a carbon neutral building when it's done, when, as the grid decarbonizes. So that's part of the reason you'll hear more and more architects saying why we need to electrify everything. So electricity, but waiting for that to happen, that's a 30, 40, 50-year process. We can't wait that long. Luckily, strangely, architects are at the front lines of what you can change, because architects are responsible for about 30, 40, 60% of all carbon emissions in the globe are in things that architects have design control over. About 30%, 28% comes from operating all the buildings that already exist. About 11% comes from the buildings we're going to build this year. All of the carbon emissions that went into making the concrete, the steel, and the insulation, and so on. Can't get the insulation these days, but the steel doubled in price, right? And transportation is when we work with a client and they build a building out in the middle of nowhere and everybody has to drive there. You're building in not just that people have to drive there and burn gas to get there, but now you have to build all the infrastructure, the roads, the sewer, everything like that. So if we can encourage them to build densely, to see the value in dense cities and so on, we can lower that. We can choose lower carbon materials, and we can go through and do deep transformations of those existing buildings to radically reduce their footprint and prepare them for the clean electricity future. So 3 years ago, 2 years ago, the last time the AIA all gathered in person, 3 years ago, there was a floor fight. I grew up in Chicago where political conventions and floor fights were like the most exciting thing you can imagine. There was a floor fight where people raised, the board wasn't ready to go there, but a group of architects put a resolution on the floor that said, we as members of the AIA recognize that the climate crisis is real and that we have a responsibility and a huge mouth-watering business opportunity to be part of the transformation. And here's a set of steps for doing it. So that got put on the floor. A bunch of people testified. They couldn't find somebody to testify against it. So they called the question, they passed it with 93% of the vote. So this resolution you can find, but basically it commits us as members of the AIA to advancing the 2030 commitment in all our firms, to transforming this thing we used to call the COAT Top 10, which is the 10 attributes of great environmentally responsible buildings, and said, marketing department got involved. We're renaming this to the Framework for Design Excellence. So how we define excellent design is not just pretty pictures. It's, yes, is it beautiful? Does it fit in with its setting? But what energy does it use? What are its carbon emissions? How does it handle water? How does it actually make the community a better place in equity and so on, all the way down the lines? How does it promote occupant health? All of those attributes have now gotten reframed. And if you want to win an honor award for your design, you will be judged against what used to be the metrics for an environmental award. So you can't, if you make beautiful but embarrassingly performing buildings, you shouldn't be able to win an award anymore. That's the commitment that the AA has made. And you're seeing this transformation move through, it's kind of percolating through the awards committees right now. So the Framework for Design Excellence turns out to be an amazing website. It's chock full of great examples of beautiful, beautiful buildings that are also using 1/3 as much energy as usual. They're connecting with their communities. They're using water wisely. They're promoting occupant health. And so it's a great set of resources you can go to online. And more importantly, we're all busy people. So what if I'm just doing a little project? I'm not going to win a COAT Top 10 award with this refit of this restaurant. What can I do? And what it tells you is if you're busy and you can only do 1 or 2 things on energy, here's the 1 or 2 things that'll probably have the biggest impact, and so on. So it's a really quick grab bag of great resources. So again, what are our opportunities as architects? We can transform existing buildings. We can design for lower embodied carbon, the carbon emissions from how we pick our materials, and we can make low carbon transport easier. And I'll show a little bit about that in a minute. So as I like to say, architects are powerful beings. Because we are small in size. No one thinks the architects have control of 60% of the globe's carbon emissions, but we're there. And it's a giant fire hose of money being spent. And if we can nudge it a little bit through our role as kind of shepherds of the built environment, we can have a really amazing transformational environment. So I'll give you some case study examples. So the points are: design for health, deliver efficiency. We find with clients, in a lot of our clients, especially in the Deep South, they're not actually interested in sustainability, but they're very interested in the health of their employees, and they're very interested in the productivity of their employees. It just turns out that design that promotes those things makes more environmentally responsible buildings. Electrify everything, transform existing buildings, design for economy, and cut embodied carbon. And I'll show you some examples of how to do that. Promote what's being called now the 15-minute city. What if you could get everywhere you really needed to be on most days within 15 minutes, preferably by walking or biking or public transit, maybe in a private car if that's the only way. And then I'll encourage you to recruit all your competitors. They're your best allies in what we're trying to do here, because this is going to be hard. No one of us can do this alone. And to stand up, and I had the pleasure of meeting some folks here who as architects, are citizen architects, speaking up in their communities and help lead their communities in these transformations. So to give some examples, this is our project that is just opening this month in Charlottesville. This is an entrepreneur who grew up in the hills around Charlottesville, loved the place, went to UVA. He invests in startups, but every startup he invests in kept leaving town because they wanted attractive space for the millennials who all want to live in tight, walkable communities. And the only office space that was available for startups was out in the suburbs, because the developers kept saying all people want is nice suburban 2-story office buildings that you have to drive to. And they said, no, we have this great thing. We have this amazing pedestrian mall in Charlottesville. It's beautiful. Everyone loves to spend their time there. What if I could offer this space for startups right there on the mall? So there was a hockey rink that was going bankrupt. So he bought it and said, that's my site. But when you're on the mall, you can only be 2 or 3 stories tall. But when you're a block away, you can be 9 stories tall. So we're architects. We can solve that problem. So we developed this process of stair-stepping our way up. And by stair-stepping our way up, which was really originally about how do we meet the crazy zoning code of what is the building height that's allowed, it turned into, that means now every floor of this 180,000 square foot office building has an outdoor deck equal to like 10 to 20 to 30% of its floor area. And those can be outdoor gardens and so on. And that's part of the rainwater control system that met the city's stormwater management. Everyone else is building big tanks. We don't need that, and so on. Also, we went through and we designed it with operable windows. And it's always a fight. People say, the mechanical engineers fight you and they say, oh, you'll de-balance my system and you'll do this, you'll do that. And we designed it with operable windows. During value engineering, you know the process where they get rid of all the valuable things in your building. They said, oh, we're just gonna go to fixed windows. That'll save us $800,000 on this $80 million project. And we said, fine. And then the next week they said, COVID. We have this COVID thing. What are you doing about COVID? And it turns out the single most commonly recommended thing from all the experts, when they finally figured out it wasn't surfaces so much as it was airborne particles, was open the windows. And suddenly they became great advocates for operable windows again. And then we got a call. This is a text from our PA is on the site visiting last week, and he said the project manager for the owner was complaining about all the headaches and the deliveries and things that are behind schedule and so on. He said, but then I went outside and there were bees. Bees have already set up and they're using all the flowers. And it's like, we're building something amazing here. And he said, that made it all worth it. And so he sends me this picture of the operable windows that we fought so hard for with a little love sign next to it. So again, because we can't help ourselves, this project has a porch, a courtyard, and a water feature. Now, one of the questions they asked us, they got very interested. There's a lot of low carbon investing, and the investor behind this building said, how can I think about this building from its carbon perspective? And we said, look, there's a giant burp of carbon at the beginning because you're building this building. And then there's the carbon emissions that happen because the power plants that feed the building are emitting carbon. And what we said was, this is a typical office building that already exists. This is as what code minimum would be. And this next one down is what we're doing if, what we're expecting for this building according to the energy model. And we said that energy you can commit to purchasing that as there's these huge windmill farms going in and solar farms going in Virginia, offshore wind. And they said you can sign up for that at a slight premium, a premium of $5,000 a year. So remember, a typical office building this size would use $400,000 a year in utilities. Our current projected consumption is $113,000 a year. And for $5,000 a year, you can sign up for carbon neutral energy. And so he said, oh, well, then I'm just kind of right there, and I've got carbon neutral operation. He says, yeah, but what about that big burp you told me about at the beginning? And we said, well, there, maybe what you want to do is restore. And so we developed a set of proposals around urban forestry that here's how much it would cost. Charlottesville, in all the wealthy sections, has a beautiful urban forest canopy, but in the poorer sections, it does not. And we said, here's what it would cost you to basically do a massive intervention where you're building social equity, you're offsetting carbon, and you're making for a healthier community. And showed them what that would cost. And again, the cost of doing that offset program would be remarkably small, so $60,000 to $90,000 for an $80 million project. So that was new construction, that was fun. What about ugly buildings? There turned out to be an oversupply of them. I won't say they're a renewable resource, but they sure are everywhere. So this is in Baton Rouge, gentleman born in Baton Rouge, this is a Baton Rouge office building. This is run by the, what's it called? The Workman's Comp, one of the nonprofit Workman's Comp Corporation. And they said, we have this problem, we don't know why. People are really uncomfortable thermally. I mean, it's too hot or it's too cold. And every time we hire a millennial, they run and leave within 2 years. We can't hold on to them. And I said, have you looked at what your office looks like? And so we said, they said, you know, Workman's Comp, the future of Workman's Comp is mostly about occupant health. It's not about like, are you hurting your back because you lifted something heavy? We have robots for that, right? So what we said is, how about making your building the test bed for a healthy design of what a healthy office that promotes activity, promotes health, and better air quality, better human activity. So they bought that, and we told them about this crazy study out of Harvard that showed that compared to conventional office air quality, if you get rid of all the VOCs, all the off-gassing from the nasty plastics, and then you double the amount of fresh air per person, but you only have it there when the people are there, you can have significantly improved cognitive performance, mental function, and the cost is like $20 a year per person. And they bought that. So we did this series of interventions while they were in the building. They freed up 1 floor at a time or 2 floors at a time, and we worked our way through the building, creating a way to move through a 7-story building without using the elevator. So the president claims each morning she comes in and she basically gets to tour all her departments on her way to her office on the 7th floor. This building cut their energy use to 1/3 of what before. At significantly better air quality and a significantly better experience. But the nerdiness is, here's the carbon footprint of a typical building, constructing a new one. If we took the plans and we ran it through a computer model of what the carbon emissions were for rebuilding that building, but then we said, no, we're gonna leave the structure and the envelope, and we're just gonna rip out the interiors and redo it, and then add a fancy new mechanical system. And we said, here's the burp from when you built it, and it's such a pig that was all dwarfed by the operating carbon emissions per year. This is time to the right, to the horizontal axis. Here's that renovation. In less than 1 year, the building's efficiency was so much better that all of the carbon that went into all of that renovation work was saved by the operation of the more efficient building. You have beautiful old buildings here in Knoxville, and I know that those are slowly getting restored and put back into service. So we then applied that to our whole portfolio, and what we found, no surprise, is the green is the giant burp of carbon from doing new construction, and the blue is how much they use in 1 year. And I won't go through that, but just to say that there's really simple, you can use fancy computer models, or you can just pick the steel and the concrete and the other 5, glass, the aluminum, and use your Revit model to tell you how much you have of that, and then just multiply out by the carbon intensity and get almost the same answer from the fancy computer programs. And this notion that we actually have choices is really happening. This is a mass timber housing project we're doing in Vancouver, where the top 9 floors are mass timber and the bottom 2 floors are concrete. And it turns out that going to mass timber, that's actually sequesters carbon. It's the one, wood is the one building material built by the sun that actually stores carbon. What we showed is we were able to produce a new building at 78% less carbon emissions than the standard way to build buildings in Vancouver. And now I want to kind of apply this to you. We just took our things and scaled it, but said per employee, per technical member of staff, every technical member of staff, we divide the carbon emissions that are in our 2019 design year, the embodied carbon plus letting it run until 2035, which is the point at which the grid should be mostly decarbonized. And the answer is every technical staff member that year was responsible for 4,800 tons of carbon emissions through the choices they were making, or the opportunity for reduction. If they could get to a 50% reduction in carbon emission, embodied carbon, and an 80% reduction in energy use, they would be saving 4,800 tons per year. The average American is responsible for 15 tons a year. So architects are the superheroes of carbon emissions. We are able to make these huge impacts through our own choices. Just to show, you can do this on quaint old buildings too. This happens to be my house, 1880 house in New Orleans. It is now net zero. It has battery backup. That's really good because our power goes out all the time in New Orleans. So I took what we learned from that. So we floated through, we had a 9-day power outage in New Orleans. All the lines into the city dropped after Ida, including the line from the generator that was in the city. They couldn't get it started because it turned out to need to have other things on the grid before it could fire up its stuff. And we applied that to an affordable housing project. And what we did was we were building 50 apartments for $6 million, $146 a square foot, very Spartan. And then we said, as a thought experiment, they said, could you put batteries on this? Because we're specializing in these apartments for veterans, and we're going to need to, some of them might have oxygen machines or things like that, getting help at the VA hospital. And so we looked into batteries, and what we said was, well, we could do that, but we'll need a lot fewer batteries if we improve the efficiency. So what would you need? So we did some quick and dirty energy modeling, and we said, on this $6 million project for about $1 million, we could actually cut the energy use in half by investing $300,000 in more efficient HVAC systems and appliances, and then $300,000 for solar and $300,000 for batteries. And you add all that up and it'd be about $1 million. And we said, but this is just a thought experiment. And they circulated that document to the local utility and they said, where do we sign? And so for a $1 million investment, they got the first grid capable net zero building of this scale in the state. And so there's the head of Entergy. And then this is the coverage in Fast Company. When in Ida, the rest of the city was without power, this one little place of 50 apartments kept going. So it's possible, we can do it today. So simple rules to adopt in your own practice, wrapping this up. 1, for code, pretend you're using the most recent energy code, whether you are or not, whether you're required to or not. You know that the energy codes are designed about what gives a cost-effective payoff for the owner. So you can, in good conscience, say, we're using these design standards because this doesn't matter what my local municipality has adopted or whether it'll ever get enforced. By designing to this, I know that I'm doing the owner right by my investment choices. Envelope, field test airtightness. If you haven't met a blower door crew, you haven't lived, they can help you find out why your buildings are leaking and not working right. HVAC, whatever the question is, the answer is a heat pump. And then lighting, put your engineer on a budget, be focused. What we're seeing is the great brightening right now where they're all just saying, oh, I'm allowed to use this many watts. The LEDs are twice as efficient, so I can just use twice as much light everywhere. And that's not actually often better. We don't need to do surgery in elevator lobbies and so on. And then do the research on appliances, which are boring but turn out to have a huge impact. Finally, promote the 15-minute city. The transformations, this is a way we can build by promoting, by making it easier for people who are on bikes. People make fun of bike racks, but it turns out if you've got an employee who commutes by bike, not only are they healthier, and will live longer and cost you less in medical care. But the energy impact of somebody who commutes to you by bike rather than car is the same as if all of your employees commuted by bike or walked to work, that would be the same as being a net zero building in terms of the carbon impact. So to the extent that you can make it easier for people to bike or walk, you're accelerating that transition. And then finally, competibuddies. So we're all competitors here, but we're also friends. That's why we're enjoying a meal together. This is too much work for any one of us to take on. We're all going to figure out tricks that work for our kinds of building types or from our project experience. If we share what we've learned, then we can double up and accelerate and raise the ground. And then the only people we're worried about, we're going to change the standard of what clients are looking for in what they say can be done. So if you haven't signed up for the AIA 2030 commitment, please do it. It's just a commitment that says you're getting on the pencil diet. You're going to record what you're doing. It only takes a few hours a year of staff time to record for most firms and to track, but you get this wealth of information that understands how your project is doing and how it could do better. And the goal is that if each year, we currently have about 1,000 firms signed up. If we could have each year, when you join, you say, I commit to next year recruiting one more firm in, it's kind of a good pyramid scheme, right? And then what happens is, so it means we have 1,000, the next year we'll have 2,000, the next year we'll have 4,000, the next year we'll have 8,000. There are 20,000 firms in the AIA. By 2025 or 2026, we could have 100% coverage. So I call this, my pastor when I was growing up gave this annual sermon called Take a Sinner to Dinner, which was you pick someone who you don't think is at your same moral level and you have a meal with them. And so I think I see a few sinners here. I'm glad you're all enjoying the meal. But please, this is how we're going to transform the planet. And people, I don't know if everyone will realize when it's done that architects did it and led the way, but we have the opportunity. So it's like never a better or more powerful time to be an architect. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Z. We're going to take a few questions here, but I also want to remind everybody that there's going to be a dessert bar in the back. There's a coffee truck outside. We're going to have champagne cocktails. Design Gala, did I cover everything? Yes. Okay, good. Okay, but with that, does anybody have any questions for Z?
So the question was, what kind of energy software do we use? And that's a great question. And often this devolves into arguments about energy modeling programs. And the best observation about energy modeling programs I've ever heard is one of the leading energy modelers once said, all models are wrong, some are useful. And what an energy model can help you do is say, would it be okay if I just, would it have a big impact if I add a lot more insulation on the roof, let's say? And that can let you explore that question. What we find is that on bigger projects, we basically just require energy modeling of our MEP people. We have had the distinct privilege of having two different employees in sequence who had worked in energy modeling before they joined the firm, and so they brought that expertise, so we did energy modeling in-house. The problem with energy modeling is usually to do it right, by the time they've got the answer to the level of precision that they need, you've already moved on in design. And as architects, you're making these big choices early on that have huge impact. So what we've found is that often by the time you get to really detailed energy model, it's there to test and confirm that the choices you made were right. I'll give it a quick example. We're doing a lab building right now. And the reason lab buildings use so hella much energy is you're bringing in all this outside air. In the south, you're dehumidifying and cooling it. And then you're flowing it through the lab where they're worried somebody might spill something and have some chemical challenge. And then to keep them safe, you're just going to move 6 air changes or 12 air changes per hour. And you're going to throw it up. So in our Bioinnovation Center, what we did was we said every lab compartment, some of them are working with lots of chemicals. Other than are doing like biotechnology, bioelectronics, where there's no chemicals at all. And so what we said is we're going to have every 1,000 square foot gets to have its own ventilation policy. And if they make a mistake, if someone walks in from next door and say, hey, I wanted to show you this cool chemical I'm working with, and then drop it on the floor, there's a panic button. But by giving every 1,000 square foot its own ventilation policy, we found that most of them were choosing much more like closer to an office level of ventilation for the work that they were doing. So that was harnessing the most sophisticated building management system imaginable, which is the humans involved who know what they're doing. That helped us drop the energy use, to 1/3, right? In the new building we're doing this thing we call the air cascade, where it's got office and classroom and then it's got labs. So what we're doing is we flow all of that great air through the last classrooms and the offices, so they're getting amazing air quality. And then we take that, and that's the dilutant to make up for all the lab exhaust. So we're getting to use the air 3 times before we throw it away, and then we use energy recovery and so on. All that work, we did the calculations on that by hand. And then the energy modeling came back from our, Newcomb Lloyd was our partner on this most recent building. They have an in-house modeling. I'm hoping that Proficient has some in-house energy modeling, or you're getting it soon. So energy modeling can help you confirm, like we said, is it this energy recovery system or this other energy recovery system will give us a better payback? So it's a super technical question. We found that was useful, but for most of it, we find we can avoid it just following simple rules of thumb. So what I would say is, don't think that you have to commit to sophisticated, expensive energy modeling early up, as long as you don't do the stupid stuff, right? So if you make a glass box building and then say, why is my energy bill so high? Well, I already know the answer to that. You don't need an energy model to say that. Another question? Yes. Sure, so I'll try to condense that. It's sort of as we move into other places, we have this kind of shtick of a porch, a courtyard, and a water feature, but those were in some sense environmental responses to the climate of the South. So what are we doing in other places? So what we're finding, for example, in the Northeast, a day like today is so perfect, right? You get these days that are too cold unless you're in the sun. And so what you want to do is have more outdoor areas. If you're going to have outdoor areas, obviously, you should put those outdoor areas in places where they can enjoy the direct sun, to name a simple one. I think the Thaden School was an example of looking at the local vernacular about, instead of everyone else who was competing for that project was talking all about mass timber, and mass timber, eventually there's a huge mass timber movement at UARC right now. But for us, we said, what's the cheapest? And the cheapest way to get a timber building is stick framing and dimensional lumber. And so we said, show us what your skill set is. Oh, we got the biggest manufacturer of trusses you've ever seen, wood trusses you've ever seen. So I think not making the argument that the client needs to spend a lot more, but making the argument that you look around and see what the local building practices as well as the local climate practices are, is for us really kind of rich. And I guess it's sort of easy and common sense to say it, but I think the hardest thing is, okay, you buy a Geary, you hire Geary because you liked Bilbao, and you'll get a building that looks like Bilbao anywhere, right? That's kind of a boring way to practice. So I think what's more fun is if you have a practice that respects, well, what were the local vernacular forms? What did they do? And how can we reference that, connect to it, and so on? So our art museum in Connecticut right now, they have this tradition of stacked stone walls. And it's just because there was so much stone in the dirt, and every time you tried to plow your cornfield, you would just turn up all this, essentially what we would call flagstone. And then they would just, well, where am I going to put it? Well, I'll stack it here. And so that becomes the fences that go over the landscape. And so that notion of stacked stone became a way to build a building facade and a shading system. So as a way to connect to that, that again, it's just learning to look around you. And it's what we're, it's stupid stuff. We all were taught this in school. And the saddest thing for, and I still have it in our own practice, we'll hire some kick-ass smart people from UT and others, and I'll see what they did in their thesis project, and then I'll see what they're working on. And I said, I saw you did this amazing thing in your thesis project, and you're just kind of building a conventional design here. And they said, yeah, but it's a this. And I say, no. I want you to come back and say there's this amazing way of reconnecting with place and so on. So I think the hardest thing we do is we kind of beat it out of our student hires, that we want to encourage them. We say, yes, there are budgets now, but how clever and innovative can you be within the budget? And I think then you get that one thing that's really valuable. Great. Okay, thanks.